Hello, everyone, and welcome to my predictions of PI 2026. So, this is a big event for myself. I am Alenvil, and I am person who took the last few weeks' time to actually look at most of the games around EIWC and a few other tournaments. So, this is what I came up with the favorites. I'm going to be straight up open with this one. I have 4 favorites for this tournament, and we will get into the favorites in a moment. So, we're going to start with number 4, and that is Team Spirit. Team 2-time TI champions already, so they have quite a bit of pedigree. And if I remember correctly, every player of their team was on that squad at that time. So they've been quite good with that one and have a quite good track record of being together. So let's talk about what I like and why I would see them as in the top 4. So they're pretty good to decide the pace of the game. But that's kind of a funny part that almost every team has in this top 4. They can play very controlled Dota, can find some good picks during the mid game. They don't force too much. What I like is that they have 2 players with Laurel and Collapse. Laurel the mid laner, Collapse the off laner, who can play pretty nicely out of everything. However, and this is kind of the biggest strength of Team Spirit, but it's this biggest weakness. They are very dependent on Yatoro to keep up everything there. So if Yatoro is on the point, he's pretty good, and honestly, he's always on point, but that's kind of the thing, that their plan is always to go around with Yatoro. And sometimes there is a bit of an issue, I would say, with that for Spirit. If the enemy managed to knock down Laurel or Collapse, or even both of them, Yatoro's kind of screwed over because he takes a bit of time to farm up, and that costs them pretty much. That's why they're honestly in my number 4 spot, because I feel like they are pretty good, but they're lacking a step against other teams. But that is kind of how I would see them play it out. A step above Team Spirit on rank number 3 are the Boom Boys, or as they are called outside of TI, Team Bet Boom. But they are quite a good team. Their biggest strength is that they have a really strong early and mid game. You barely see them lose any lanes whatsoever in the game, so that's their biggest strength. However, one of their bigger problems is that I would say that they can't cleanly convert those positions they get themselves out of the mid and early game. And we could see that in the EWC final pretty heavily versus Parivision. They had a strong early game. They came there, but they couldn't close it out, which gave them a bit of leeway, and a rough patch gave Parivision the way to get into that game once again, and that did quite hard with that one. But at the same time, they could get out of the position as well in the game number 2. They played that out well. They didn't have that strong of an early game, and then they kind of backed in there. But one thing about the Boom Boys, Boom Boys, kind of interchangeable, but we will have to try to call them Boom Boys now. They can play pretty well, and honestly, they fit their name quite well. They go either boom or bust, and that is why I see them as number 3. To be honest, they're stronger than Spirit because they have always these early game leads, but on the other hand, they do have the issue that they sometimes lose out in the later stages of the game. In my spot number 2, we got the team Yandex, which I feel like they play really well. I like their rotations, how they play out, their ability to create chaos on the enemy team, that they dictate the pace. And when they see a winning fight, they immediately clean out on that fight. They go hard on that one. They have the ability to play up to the number 1 team, which I'm not going to name yet because that would actually spoil a bit. But I think that they have one of the abilities to play a very methodical lane of Dota, and that works out quite well for them. If they get a lead, they kind of try to starve you out along with anything else, and that gives really a problem for the enemy teams. That's what they did to Spirit in their series. They got that one out pretty nicely. They gave them a pretty hard starving, and that cost Spirit pretty well. That's why I would say Yandex is number 2. And that shows up quite a bit how they are right now, I would say, and they're pretty good with that. That's why they're number 2. And I would say they're they're number 2, but I would call them kind of more like a 1B to the 1A team because both have similarities, but there's a slight difference that I will point out in a moment. So before we head into team number 1, I'm going to throw out 2 honorable mentions because they will come up in the video tomorrow mostly. But I feel like they deserve to be talked about if we're talking about favorites because of how they are. Of course, one of them is the reigning and defending champion of the International 2025, which is Team Falcons. I feel like they're a strong team. They do have their kind of situations there. The problem for them, I feel like right now, is that they kind of coasted a bit through the season, it felt like. And another part is they have 2 losses I wouldn't put completely in there to say, you know what, they're kind of like outside of that tier because those 2 losses do hurt them quite a bit. One was versus Vici Gaming in the EWC because that was a pretty heavy loss that they should have not taken there. And the second one is, I mean, we shouldn't put too much stock into that one, but I do have to kind of put stock into it anyway. And I would say that is the 3-0 demolishment that Liquid did to them in the one win Essence tournament last last week. So that's why Falcons kind of drop out of the top 4/5 for me in that way, but they are sitting right beside the fans of the favorites. So we'll talk about them tomorrow a bit more, to be honest. So that's about them. And then the other team I do want to give a bit of something is Iron Wings or One Win. Iron Wings, they are called in TI because of their sponsor, which a lot of teams have in this thing. So that's going to be a thing that we do have to keep in mind here. I feel like they have good results, but they have hit a rough patch lately. And one of the bigger parts that they have an issue with right now is their offlaner 33 is a bit more of a greedy offlaner, and a lot of teams in the top bracket do punish that very heavily, and we got to keep in mind that right now, if they can figure that out during TI or right before TI now, I feel like they could do something about it, but right now they're sitting outside as well, so that's at least I want to mention them. Tomorrow they're going to get a bit more of a mention, so we'll see about that tomorrow then. So, and now, number 1 in my ranking right now of the favorites is Party Vision, or as they are called here in TI, their Team Vision. I know they did have to qualify through the bracket, but honestly, after that EWC run, they showed a lot of heart there, and I would say that is one of their bigger points to be talking about. If I want to say their strength, one of the things they do really, really well is forcing the enemy to make a decision immediately. They most of the time attack one position and then at the same time have something else going on that creates a one thing. And that is something to make the enemies go pretty hard. They do have some really nice decision making in that they do have a great drafter with Puppy right now at being their coach. That I feel like that is a good role for Puppy to have right now. He's a bit of a coach, and that's really, as I say right now. Well, I do say Yandex, for example, is methodical. I would call Team Vision more of a clinical team, to be honest. If they get a slight whiff of a lead in somehow way, shape, or form, they do batter the enemy down with that one. And I've seen that through a lot of the games, especially EWC. You saw them forcing the enemy to take decisions and just taking advantage of that one. I think one game they were a bit behind, then they found a slight movement. I think it was against Yandex actually, where they kind of went with the situation where they were like, okay, we want to push it out, but they just turned it completely around. Then, if we look at the weaknesses, because we see, I gotta say, every team here in this bracket does have a slight weakness. On Vision's side, they can force enemies quite nicely into that position that they have to take a decision. Meanwhile, on the other side, they're not really that great doing that themselves when they're forced into that position. Yandex did it quite nicely to them. The Boom Boys did it at a point to them. Spirit did it at a point to them, so they did close out each series. Well, except the Spirit because that was the group stage, and there were only 2 games, so it was a 1-1 draw there. But I would say they are pretty nicely doing that, and that's really the weakness you have to expose for Team Vision. Force them to make the decision, not let them dictate the tempo, which is a lot of that one. And another point, and I don't feel like it's big point right now, but I would say Satanic is a bit iffy sometimes in the start of the laning phase. I think if I remember against Yandex, they did put him pretty badly into a spot where they put him almost down like 4-0. And that was just kind of like a situation that they keep having to dig themselves out of. If Vision can really defend Satanic a lot in the games, that they don't make him fall pretty far behind, they're pretty good in the positions, and they do have quite a diverse pool. Maybe lay off of some of their picks because if I remember correctly, versus Yandex, they pulled out no, not versus Yandex. It was versus Spirit. They pulled out a Largo mid, which didn't really work out in their favor, but they did deserve with their win of the EWC the 1A place. But Yandex did give him a fight in the semifinals. The finals was against Boom Boys, so Parry Vision had to run actually through almost all of the top 4 teams there, and they showed pretty nicely up what they could do, and that I feel like is really Parry Vision's strength, that they've shown that they can beat all the other teams. But as I said, I would say these top 4 are really there. And as I said, one of the things every team does well in this bracket right now is dictate their own tempo. Whoever gets the tempo right now is kind of like in the lead, I would say, right now. And that's going to be a very interesting position to be in. And I wouldn't say there's no team where you would say they're flawless. And I feel like that could make quite a nice bracket. Anyway, that's it for my top 4 teams, or the favorites of right now. And tomorrow we'll be back with another game or another round of teams. I hope to see you guys then. Bye bye.